intersections with politics in psychoanalytic communities. Questions about the temptations of closure and sectarianism on the one hand, and the need for inclusion and solidarity on the other run through this talk. I don't know how to answer these questions, but let's see if there's a way of framing them that's helpful for us to work through some of the problems. I'm going to talk about three aspects of the relationships that we form when we're with other psychoanalysts, and about ecology, ethnography, and ethics. I'll describe some case examples that also raise more questions than answers. I'm primarily concerned with connections and disjunctions between politics and psychoanalysis, which are two, sometimes entirely separate parts of my life. Not only the connections, that is, because though the psychoanalytic clinic is institutionally moulded by political processes and the distress that people bring to the clinic is at least refracted through societal contradictions, that space of the clinic must also in some way be separate as a space to speak freely, free from political demands. When it comes to places where we psychoanalysts talk together about our work, there are many ways in which how we talk and deal with those who agree and disagree with us mirror ways of operating in the political sphere. And I noticed this straight away when I started training as a psychoanalyst after some years of political activity on the revolutionary left. The profound effects of breaks and purges and splinter groups at home, and also significantly, I think, on an international level, were present in both some weariness about internal contradictions and implicit rules about what you would say about other traditions of work that were different but sometimes too close to your own. And I recognized this from the dynamic of party building and rivalry on the far left. It was expressed in the joke that if we could get two comrades together, we would form a group. 3 would mean forming an international, and 4 would mean a split. You might recognize this dynamic. There was a time in London where I trained when two rival psychoanalytic groups came together for joint seminars. I trained with one of the groups and also applied to join the other one, where I was told that this would be fine for now, but one day I would need to make a choice. It was a warning that rang alarm bells for me, that the malign shadow of the party in the realm of politics, a form that demanded loyalty from its members, could be replicated in the shadow of the school, the psychoanalytic school that would give recognition and implicit accreditation of who you were. I was struck by the almost robotic repetition of current buzzwords and phrases in meetings of the group, as well as ritual mention of a leader of the group for having pointed to or having developed this or that psychoanalytic concept. Discussions of clinical case presentations and theoretical talks consisted of the circulation of a closed discourse, and people who spoke out of line would be politely corrected or shut down. I remember one painful instance where an outsider mistook the then favourite term cipher for shiver, and when he said it, intrigued by what it meant, there was laughter and wordplay, not hostile, but enough that this visitor didn't return. I was equally astonished when I encountered one of this group's members in a quite different context, and they behaved like a normal human being, pretty well the full set of appropriate social skills. Apart from noticing, with some delight, the reappearance in the psychoanalytic world of practices I was well schooled in as a member of revolutionary groups and their many front organisations, I brought with me an aversion to some mainstream cultural political tropes, one of which is community. For some reason, though I know it's used positively by some on the left, I've never liked this as a term. Perhaps it's because I was brought up as an atheist, and so the word community smacked of fake inclusive incorporation of obedient, religiously observant citizens, normative, suffocating. Maybe there's a way of rescuing the signifier community for progressive purposes. I don't know. There are alternative terms. One would be psychoanalytic movement, and there is a book by Freud on the history of that kind of thing, but it still sounds a bit, how can I put it, too evangelical. One of my favourites, also from Freud, is Horde, which is suitably ironic and pathologising, as in Freud's letter to George Grodek, where Freud writes that, and I quote, anyone who has recognised transference and resistance as the focal points of therapy belong irretrievably to the mad horde. End quote. Another term I like a lot is network. And then there's ecology, which appeals to me as an eco-socialist. Let's look at ecology. There's actually a largely forgotten history of links between psychoanalysis and ecology that makes it strangely relevant. That history, which is told as one of the chapters of John Forrester and Laura Cameron's 2017 book Freud in Cambridge, also draws attention to the way that psychoanalytic institutions have been keen to recruit and make use of people. The key figure in this story is A.G. Tansley, who, in 1920, published a best-selling book called The New Psychology and Its Relation to Life. The book discussed some existing sympathetic accounts of psychoanalysis in the work of William McDougall and Wilfred Trotter, including an extension of instinct theories to explain what Trotter and then Tansley described as the herd instinct. The book is very biologically oriented, and it speaks of Janet, Freud, Jung in the same breath, and plays to the idea that human beings by nature become what Tansley refers to as, and I quote, an organ in a larger unit, become part of national organisms that may then become components of what he calls a world organism. We should remember that such biological accounts, though often politically problematic, potentially more dangerous than notions of community, were also at the time promoted by the left. There was an influential current of anarchism, for example, in the work of Prince Kropotkin, that built its account of mutual aid from the biological predisposition of the human species towards collective creative activity rather than tooth and claw competitiveness. So that book, The New Psychology, was such a stunning success, selling 10,000 copies in the UK, 4,000 in the United States, and such a good advertisement for psychoanalysis that Freud and his followers in England were keen to bring Arthur Tansley into the fold. Tansley was already a lecturer in Cambridge and editor of the Journal of Ecology when he wrote this book. He was a pioneer in the field of ecosystems research, responsible for naming that field of study. And as Forrester and Cameron point out, key figures in the scientific and literary world in England were in analysis with Freud, by 1922 making up 40% of his patient caseload. Freud wrote to Ernest Jones in April 1922 that, and I quote, "Tansley has started analysis last Saturday. I find a charming man in him, a nice type of the English scientist. It might be a gain to win him over to our science at the loss of botany." End quote. In 1923, Tansley resigned his position at Cambridge to study full-time with Freud in Vienna. Hopes were high on Jones's part that Tansley's expertise in biology would help buttress psychoanalysis and put to rest some of the more unwise Lamarckian tendencies among some of Freud's colleagues and possible rivals like Ferenczi. This is one reason why the biologically grounded account in the New Psychology is so interesting. There's potential there for taking psychoanalysis in a direction that will be both scientifically reputable and more social. 4 years later, in 1927, Tansley had to make a choice. He was by now working as a psychoanalyst, but was offered the chair of botany at Oxford University. He chose botany. He then went on to work on nature conservation between the wars and after the Second World War. He was a key figure in that field. As well as opening up the possibility of a radical rapprochement between psychoanalysis and biology in line with progressive accounts of the collective creature, creative potential of human nature, a fully ecological turn in psychoanalysis could also conceptually embed the human being in broader biological and social systems. You have to bear in mind here the difference between ecology and environment. While individuals, with their own instinctual needs, may bump into each other in an environment as a kind of external space, the notion of ecology has organisms constituted as part of it, even while they may think of themselves as being separate individuals, which is the way that we're ideologically schooled to think of ourselves in competitive capitalist society.